My name is Kaitlyn. I'm 28 years old, and in a family of loud socialites, I was always the invisible one. My mother thought I was just a mousy accountant who didn't understand the real world, until she laughed in my face at dinner, and I decided to let the math finally catch up to her. The humidity in Chicago was thick enough to chew, a heavy blanket of mid-July heat that made the skyscrapers look like they were shimmering in a haze. I sat in my office, a space of glass, steel, and organized files, staring at my phone. The screen glowed with a text from my mother. "Kaitlyn, darling, it's been too long. Come to the estate this Friday for dinner. I'm hosting a few friends, and it simply won't be the same without my eldest daughter. Travel is already arranged. Don't be difficult." Don't be difficult. That was her code for don't remind me you have a life of your own. I'm a forensic accountant. My world is built on the cold, hard logic of numbers. I find the things people try to hide, the missing zeros, the laundered assets, the creative mistakes. I like my life quiet. I like my blonde hair pulled back in a practical knot and my suits tailored but gray. I am the shadow in a family that screams for the spotlight. 2 days later, a black car dropped me off at the foot of the Brooks estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house was a sprawling neoclassical monster, all white columns and perfectly manicured hedges that smelled of expensive fertilizer and cedar mulch. Stepping into the foyer felt like stepping into a freezer. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 65 degrees, carrying the scent of Joe Malone candles, pomegranate, and cynicism. "Kaitlyn, you're actually here!" a voice boomed. My younger brother, Tyler, leaned against the mahogany banister. He was wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned just a little too far, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. At 24, his only job was son of Evelyn Brooks, and he did it with a professional level of arrogance. "I'm here, Tyler. Where's Mom?" "In the dining hall holding court," he smirked, pushing off the railing. "You might want to fix your hair, sis. You look a little suburban." I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one I'd been feeling since I was 6 years old. I followed him toward the dining room, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. The room was bathed in the warm golden glow of a crystal chandelier. My mother, Evelyn, stood at the head of a table set for 12. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a stiff, perfect wave, and her silk dress probably cost more than my first car. She was laughing, a sharp, melodic sound that didn't reach her eyes, as she spoke to the Hendersons, the local country club royalty. When she saw me, she didn't move to hug me. She simply tilted her head, her eyes scanning me from my sensible shoes to my face. "There she is," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying across the room. "My daughter, the tax collector. Come in, Kaitlyn. Try not to look so grim. You're among friends tonight." She turned back to Mrs. Henderson with a stage whisper. "She works in a cubicle, poor thing. All those dusty files. It's a wonder she hasn't turned gray already." The Hendersons chuckled. I stood there, the cool air of the house suddenly feeling very thin. I took my seat at the far end of the table next to Tyler as the first course, a chilled gazpacho, was served. I didn't know then that this was the last meal I would ever eat in this house, or that in exactly 7 days, the woman at the head of the table would be begging me for a place to sleep. The clinking of silver against fine bone china was the only sound for a moment. I watched my mother swirl her Chardonnay, the liquid catching the light like liquid gold. She looked regal, untouchable. "You know, everyone," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into that confidential tone she used when she was about to be particularly cruel. I've been thinking a lot about the Brooks legacy. My late husband worked so hard for this, and Tyler is the heart of this family. Tyler beamed, puffing out his chest. He reached for his wine glass with a smug glance my way. I've decided to restructure the family trust, she continued, her eyes finally snapping to mine. They were as cold as the marble floors. It's time we put the resources where they can actually be enjoyed. Kaitlyn, you've always been so self-sufficient, so career-focused. You don't need the burden of managing family assets. The gazpacho turned to lead in my stomach. Restructure, Mom? The trust is balanced specifically to cover the estate's overhead and the tax liens Dad left behind. You can't just move pieces around like a game of Monopoly. Evelyn let out a sharp, tinkling laugh that made the Hendersons join in. Listen to her, always talking about liens and balances. Darling, you're a bookkeeper, not a strategist. I've decided to move your distributive share over to Tyler. He's planning a venture in the Hamptons, and he needs the capital. Besides, what would you do with it? Buy more gray cardigans? The table erupted in polite, muffled snickers. Tyler didn't even look at me. He was already checking his phone, likely calculating how many zeros were about to hit his account. Mom, please, I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my neck. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so the guests wouldn't hear the specifics. I've been looking at the quarterly filings. The deferred tax liabilities from the 2022 filing haven't been settled. If you gut the reserve to fund Tyler's venture, the IRS is going to flag the estate within the week. There are safeguards I put in place that... Evelyn slammed her hand on the table, not hard enough to break anything, but enough to make the crystals sing. The room went silent. Enough of your safeguards, Kaitlyn. You've always used those spreadsheets to try and control us, to feel important. She leaned in, her perfume, cloying and floral, filling my senses. The decision is made. The papers are signed. Go back to your cubicle in Chicago, honey. The grown-ups are talking about the real world now. She turned her back to me, literally dismissing me from the conversation to ask Mrs. Henderson about her yacht. I sat there for a heartbeat, looking at my mother's perfectly straight back. She had no idea. She didn't know that for 3 years, I had been the one filing the extensions, the one navigating the creative accounting my father had used to keep this house, and the one quietly paying the shortfall out of my own salary when Tyler overspent. I stood up slowly. No one looked at me. It was as if I had already vanished. I'll leave my key on the foyer table, I said quietly. Tyler didn't even look up from his phone. Make sure the gate closes behind you, sis. Repairs are expensive. I walked out of that dining room, through the frozen foyer and out into the humid Connecticut night. My heart was pounding, but my mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I had been the shield for a family that thought I was the dirt beneath their shoes. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I didn't call a cab. I opened my secure work portal and looked at the Brooks estate file. You want me to stay in my cubicle, Mom? I whispered to the empty driveway. Fine, I'll do exactly that. With 3 taps, I withdrew my personal authorization as the estate's representative. I halted the automated payment plan I had set up from my private account to cover their back taxes, and finally, I hit Submit on a notification of withdrawal for the IRS power of attorney. The countdown had started. The flight back to Chicago was a blur of dark clouds and the hum of jet engines. I stared out the window at the flickering lights of the Midwest, my reflection in the glass looking ghostly and tired. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, a cold, hard clarity. I walked into my apartment at 2 a.m. It was everything the Connecticut estate wasn't. minimalist, modern, and paid for entirely by me. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on my sofa, listening to the muffled sirens of the city below, and felt the weight of my family's secrets sitting in my laptop bag. Monday morning, the Chicago office felt like a sanctuary. The air was pressurized and filtered, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive roasted coffee. I sat in my cubicle, which was actually a corner office with a view of the lake, and opened the Brooks Estate master file one last time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years, I had been the red pen. Every time Tyler bought a car he couldn't afford using company funds, I was the one who reclassified the transaction to keep it from looking like embezzlement. Every time my mother ignored a property tax notice because she was too busy hosting a charity gala, I was the one who negotiated the late fees away. "No more," I whispered. I spent the morning sending 3 very specific emails. The first was to the Brooks family bank. I officially resigned as the secondary signatory on the trust, citing irreconcilable differences in management. This effectively froze the transition of funds to Tyler. If he wanted that Hamptons money, he'd have to prove where the liquid assets were coming from, something he couldn't do. The second was to the IRS field agent I'd been massaging for 18 months. I informed him that I was no longer representing the estate and that all future correspondence should be sent directly to Evelyn Brooks. The third was a simple stop payment on the $12,000 monthly wire transfer I sent from my personal savings to cover the estate's interest-only mortgage. By Tuesday afternoon, the silence was broken. My phone buzzed on my mahogany desk. Mom. I let it ring. The vibration traveled through the wood, a persistent, rhythmic thrumming. Then came a text. "Kaitlyn, there's some ridiculous error at the bank. Tyler is at the dealership and his card was declined. Fix it immediately. He's embarrassed." I didn't reply. I watched the cursor blink on my screen, steady and patient. Wednesday brought the voicemail. "Kaitlyn, it's Mom. I don't know what kind of little tantrum you're throwing, but this isn't funny. The power at the guest house flickered off today, and the gardener says his check bounced. Call me back before I get truly angry." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the gray-blue water of Lake Michigan. I could almost smell the pomegranate candles and hear the tinkling laughter from that dinner. She had called me a bookkeeper. She told the grown-ups to talk. Well, the grown-ups were about to have a very long conversation with her, and they weren't going to be wearing gray cardigans. They'd be wearing badges. Thursday in Chicago arrived with a relentless slate-gray rain that lashed against my office windows. The city looked blurred, like a watercolor painting left out in the storm. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the HVAC and the occasional sharp ding of an incoming email. Then, my phone didn't just buzz, it screamed. Tyler's caller ID flashed on the screen. I let it ring for 3 beats before picking up. "Kaitlyn, what the hell is going on?" His voice was high-pitched, vibrating with a panic he usually reserved for losing a polo match. I could hear the background noise of a busy showroom, the echo of polished floors and the low murmur of salesmen. "Hello, Tyler," I said, my voice as cool as the rain outside. "Is there a problem?" "A problem? I'm at the Porsche dealership in Greenwich. I'm trying to sign the lease on the 911, and the finance manager just told me my account status is under review. He looked at me like I was a common thief, Kaitlyn. Fix it, now." I swiveled my chair toward the window. "I can't fix it, Tyler. I resigned as the trust administrator on Monday. I told Mom during dinner that the reserves were empty. You shouldn't be buying a car when the estate's primary accounts are currently being flagged for an audit." "I don't care about your nerd talk," he hissed. "Call the bank and tell them to release the Hamptons funds. Mom said it was mine." The Hamptons funds don't exist, Tyler. They were theoretical. They were based on a tax refund that I decided not to file for because it would have been fraudulent. Goodbye. I hung up before he could shout again. My heart was thudding against my ribs, a dull, heavy rhythm. I wasn't a cruel person by nature, but there was a strange clinical satisfaction in watching the logic play out. For years, I had been the one holding the dam together with my bare hands. I had simply stepped away, and now the first leaks were turning into a flood. An hour later, a voicemail arrived from my mother. It wasn't frantic like Tyler's. It was cold, dripping with a condescending venom that made my skin crawl. Kaitlyn Elizabeth Brooks, I don't know what little game you're playing with the bank, but I've already instructed our family attorney to look into your management of our funds. If you think you can hold our lifestyle hostage because I hurt your feelings at dinner, you are sadly mistaken. You're acting like a jealous child. Apologize to your brother and stop this nonsense immediately, or don't bother calling yourself a Brooks ever again. I listened to it twice. I looked at the gray cardigan I was wearing, the one she mocked. I felt the weight of the thousands of dollars I had poured into her mortgage, her charity events, and Tyler's bailouts. I didn't call. I didn't apologize. Instead, I typed a short text and hit send. I'm just doing what you told me, Mom. I'm staying in my cubicle. The grown-ups are at your front door. You should probably answer it. As I pressed send, I saw a notification on my computer, a public records alert I'd set up for the Greenwich address. A lis pendens had just been filed. The bank was officially notifying the courts of their intent to foreclose. The house of cards wasn't just wobbling, it was falling. Friday morning arrived with a stillness that felt like the eye of a hurricane. In the accounting world, Friday is usually a day of closing out cycles, but for the Brooks estate, it was the day the cycle broke entirely. I was in the break room, the smell of burnt French roast hanging in the air, when my phone vibrated so hard it nearly skated off the granite counter. It wasn't Tyler this time. It was the estate's landline, a number I hadn't seen on my caller ID in months. I picked up. Hello? Kaitlyn, there are men here. My mother's voice was stripped of its usual melodic lilt. It sounded thin, reedy, and old. Men in suits. They're at the gate with the sheriff. They're saying something about a seizure of property. They've taped a bright orange notice to the mahogany doors, Kaitlyn. Do you have any idea how that looks to the neighbors? I took a slow sip of my coffee. The bitterness felt grounding. It's a foreclosure notice, Mom, and likely a notice of federal tax lien. I told you on Tuesday that the safeguards were gone. Well, fix it, she shrieked, her voice suddenly regaining its sharp edge. Call your little friends at the IRS. Tell them there's been a mistake. Tell them I'm Evelyn Brooks. I can't do that, Mom. I don't represent you anymore. And honestly, even if I did, there's no money left to negotiate with. You spent the tax reserve on the Hamptons deposit for Tyler. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the distant sound of a heavy door thudding shut and the muffled shouting of Tyler in the background. You did this, she whispered, the venom returning. You're doing this to punish me because I told the truth at dinner. You've always been a jealous, spiteful girl. You're withholding my money. It was never your money, Mom. It was the government's money that I was managing to keep in your pocket. I just stopped lying for you. I will sue you, she roared. I've already called Marcus Sterling. I'm going to sue you for malpractice, for breach of fiduciary duty, for everything you've ever touched. I'll make sure you never work as an accountant in this country again. The threat should have scared me. A week ago, it would have. But as I stood in my quiet office break room looking at my reflection in the stainless steel fridge, I realized Marcus Sterling, the family's high-priced attorney, hadn't been paid his retainer in 6 months. I knew because I was the one who usually authorized the wire. Marcus won't take your call, Mom. His firm has a policy about representing clients with frozen assets. check your primary checking account. I think you'll find the balance is currently 0. I hung up. I walked back to my desk and sat down. My hands were shaking just a little. I had reached the midpoint. The bridge was burned and the fire was beautiful. I looked at my calendar. 2 days until the 7-day mark. 2 days until the house of cards officially hit the floor. Saturday morning in Chicago was eerily quiet. I woke up before my alarm, the pale morning light filtering through my blinds like bars of silver. I didn't check my phone immediately. Instead, I made a pot of tea, the steam rising in curls that mimicked the foggy uncertainty of the world I had just upended. When I finally did look at my screen, I had 42 missed calls. Most were from my mother, but a few were from Tyler, and even one from the Brooks estate groundskeeper. I scrolled through the texts. The tone had shifted. The white-hot rage of Friday had cooled into a frantic, jagged desperation. "Kaitlyn, please, the bank sent a crew. They're putting stickers on the furniture. They say it's collateral. Tell me what to do. I don't understand where the money went." I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my personal bank app. I looked at the savings tab. For 3 years, that number had barely moved, despite my high salary. Now, for the first time, it was finally starting to grow again, because I wasn't bleeding out $12,000 every month to keep a ghost alive in Connecticut. The phone rang in my hand. It was Tyler. I answered. "Kaitlyn?" He sounded like he was crying. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "They took the keys to the SUV. Mom is locked in her bedroom, and there are people in the hallway counting the paintings. They're saying Dad didn't pay the inheritance tax in 2019. They're saying it's all gone." "It is gone, Tyler," I said, my voice quiet. "It's been gone for a long time. You were just spending the ghost of a fortune." "But you always fixed it," he yelled, a flash of his old self peeking through. "You're the one who does the taxes. Why did you stop?" "Because at dinner, Mom told me I was a mousy bookkeeper who didn't understand the real world. So I decided to let her live in the real world. In the real world, Tyler, if you don't pay your bills, you lose your house. In the real world, you can't mock the person who is literally buying your groceries." "Wait, what do you mean?" "The mortgage payments for the last 24 months, those didn't come from the trust, Tyler. The trust was empty by 2023. Those payments came from my salary. My boring cubicle job paid for your lifestyle." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I heard a muffled thud, likely Tyler dropping his phone or sinking into a chair. You were paying for us?" "I was, until I wasn't. Tell Mom to check the secondary ledger I left in the library desk, the blue one. It shows every cent I funneled into that house to keep her from being evicted. Tell her to look at the source of funds column." I hung up before he could apologize. I didn't want an apology. I wanted them to see the numbers. Numbers don't lie, and they don't have feelings. They just exist, cold and final. I spent the rest of the day walking by the lake. The wind was whipping off the water, cold and bracing, clearing the scent of pomegranate candles from my mind. I was no longer the family's secret architect. I was just Kaitlyn Brooks, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was worth more than the balance of someone else's account. Friday morning, 7 days exactly. I sat in my office, the sun streaming through the glass in bright geometric shapes. My desk was clear, save for a single cup of peppermint tea and my phone. I wasn't working. I was waiting. At 10:14 a.m., the call came. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, the background noise gave it away immediately. I heard the sharp, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of a heavy-duty packing tape dispenser. I heard the low, gruff voices of men moving heavy furniture. And then I heard the sound of a woman breaking. "Kaitlyn?" It wasn't the voice of the woman who had stood at the head of a mahogany table in a silk dress. This voice was brittle, like dry leaves being crushed. "I'm here, Mom." "They're taking the piano, Kaitlyn, your father's Steinway. And the Hendersons, they're standing at the end of the driveway, watching. They're taking pictures with their phones." She let out a jagged, hysterical sob. "The bank officer said the house is no longer ours. He gave us 1 hour to pack suitcases. 1 hour! I don't have anywhere to go. My cards are all grayed out at the ATM. Please, I'm begging you, just 50,000, just enough to get a suite at the Waldorf while we sort this mistake out." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. I could see it all. The orange stickers on the velvet chairs, the dust motes dancing in the air of a house that had been a lie for a decade, and the neighbors, the friends, watching the fall of the Brooks empire like it was a spectator sport. "It's not a mistake, Mom," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the anger I thought I'd feel. "I checked the filings this morning. The estate is officially insolvent. There is no sorting it out. The money is gone because it was never really there." "But you have it. You have that high-paying job. You have your savings. You're a Brooks. You can't let your mother stand on the sidewalk like a vagrant." "Do you remember what you said to me last Friday? When you laughed? When you told the Hendersons I was just a mousy bookkeeper in a cubicle?" "I was joking, darling. You know how I am." "I wasn't joking. For 2 years, I paid the back taxes on that house from my own bank account. Every month, I sent $12,000 to keep the bank from doing exactly what they're doing right now. I was the only thing standing between you and that sidewalk." The silence on the other end was absolute, save for the distant sound of a truck's backup beeper. "You were paying?" "I was. Until that dinner. When you laughed in my face, I realized I was paying for the privilege of being your punching bag, so I stopped the transfer that night. It took exactly 7 days for the math to catch up to you. I didn't steal your money, Mom. I just stopped giving you mine." "Kaitlyn, please," she whispered, the arrogance finally, completely extinguished. "What am I supposed to do?" "Tyler is young. He can get a job. And you, I suggest you pack the sensible clothes. You won't have much use for silk where you're going." I hung up. I didn't wait for her to cry again. I didn't wait for a list of excuses. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city was indifferent to the drama in Connecticut. The lake was still blue, the world kept turning. I felt a strange, light sensation in my chest. For the first time in 28 years, I didn't owe anyone anything. 2 weeks passed. The headlines in the Greenwich local papers had moved on from "local socialite faces foreclosure" to something about a zoning dispute at the yacht club. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, a fall from grace is treated like a contagious disease. Everyone stays far away to make sure they don't catch it. I sat on the balcony of my Chicago apartment, the evening air beginning to cool. The city lights were starting to twinkle like fallen stars, a chaotic but beautiful grid that made sense to me. My phone buzzed on the small metal table. It was a photo from Tyler. I opened it and saw a cramped, dimly lit living room with popcorn ceilings and beige carpeting that looked like it had seen better decades. In the corner of the frame, my mother was sitting on a floral-patterned sofa that definitely hadn't come from her estate. She was staring at a small television, her hair slightly unkempt, wearing a simple cotton robe. Gone were the diamonds, gone was the cold, regal posture. "We're moved in," the text from Tyler read. "It's a 2-bedroom in New Jersey. Mom doesn't talk much. She keeps asking who called today, but the phone hasn't rung once. No one from the club has reached out. I start a job at a car rental place on Monday. It's different." I didn't feel the rush of triumph I expected. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief. It was the feeling of a long, grueling audit finally coming to a close. I didn't reply to Tyler. I didn't need to. The cycle of debt, emotional and financial, was finally broken. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the skyline. For years, I had believed my mother's narrative, that I was the mousy one, the boring accountant who lived a small life while they lived a large one. I had let her make me feel like my hard work was just a service to her greatness. But as I watched the traffic move smoothly along Lakeshore Drive, I realized the truth. I wasn't the mousy one. I was the foundation. And a foundation doesn't need to shout to be powerful. It just needs to be solid. I hadn't stolen their lifestyle. I hadn't even taken their money. I had simply stopped being the one who bore the weight of their lies. When I stepped away, the laws of gravity and mathematics did the rest. I picked up my mug of coffee, the ceramic warm against my palms. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at a spreadsheet or a tax lien. I wasn't calculating someone else's mistakes or fixing someone else's fraud. I was just Kaitlyn Brooks. I lived in a cubicle in Chicago, and the view from here was absolutely perfect. The ledger was balanced, and for once, I was the one with the surplus.